Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of Zion's Finest. This is Kenny Brown. This episode is going to be kind of an assessment and review of 6 months of Shatterpoint. It's a year-end review, and it's for me and Matt are the ones who do this. What happened is Matt and Jesse Eakin from Hello There are going to be recording a podcast episode talking about running the Republic. I was going to be joining that episode as kind of a bump on the log because while I have run the Republic a bunch, I have not run it nearly as much as Matt or Jesse, so just don't have as developed of thoughts on how to do that. But what happened was on the night that we were going to record, Matt and I had decided to gather together to do some games. Jesse was unable to make it. He was out sick. And so what we ended up doing was Matt and I recorded this episode, which you're going to be listening to. So what we do is we kind of give a review of the 6 months of Shatterpoint, what things did better than we expected, what things did worse than we expected. It's super fun. I obviously love talking with Matt. I love talking with Matt about Shatterpoint. And I think you'll find there will be things here that you might agree or disagree with us on. Obviously, you can't agree or disagree on whether or not we feel like we kind of missed the mark. But it's just it's an interesting thing to think about. 6 months in, what is better than we thought? What is worse than we thought? And Matt and I both have some not super surprising thoughts on that, but we fleshed out. We have a lot of fun with this episode. Okay, so first off, we've got some tournaments to promote. CanCon is happening. This is Tobias's tournament that's happening in Australia. So for those of you who are in Australia or can make it to Australia, it's probably a lovely place to be in January. January 26th through 28th, it's in Canberra. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes. I think it's a part of a wider tournament convention. So it's awesome that they have a Shatterpoint event. Ooh, that reminds me. It looks like 2024 Adepticon is going to be having a Shatterpoint event. I know it's a Premier Showdown event. I don't know if there's any kind of prize support or what's going on. Unfortunately, I'm going to Disneyland in March, and so I won't be able to go to Adepticon, but it looks like it's going to be super fun. So if you want more details, you can either find them on the Slack, or I'm sure that there are people willing to talk about it on the other socials. Okay, so Cody out in Reno, Nevada is having his tournament on December 16th, so that's going to be this next week. It's at Game Castle in Reno, Nevada. Dice roll at 11:30 Pacific. It's a $20 buy-in. Christopher in Sweden, in Linköping, Sweden, they're having their January DEF CON. It's happening on January 6th and 7th. So if you're in Europe, the EU, are able to travel to Sweden, then it's going to be 2 tournaments, one on January 6th and one on January 7th. They're working on building their local tournament scene there. And then also this week, so the week of December 11th through the 18th, I am confirming the amount of terrain that we're going to be taking to LVO. So I will be following up with people who have committed to take it, and we're just trying to get some kind of a final estimate number. So again, it's just going to be a casual tournament. We're going to be there playing Shatterpoint, MCP, other things, but just FYI. Okay, so I encourage everyone to rate and review the podcast, join the Slack. Want to encourage everyone to answer the poll question that we're going to have following this episode. We have sent out the last of the first set of promos for people who signed up. I'm still having people who are kind of dribbling in, but just FYI, I should probably have said this at the start. My wife just had a baby yesterday. Her name is Evelyn Faye Brown. We call her Sugar. And so Sugar was born yesterday, and while we were waiting in the hospital for what seemed like an interminable, we were in the hospital for a while, I designed the next set of promo cards. It's a Vader Luke set. So, you know, it was a great way to spend the time while we were waiting for our baby to arrive, and then while we were just kind of sitting around in the hospital while everyone was kind of recovering. So I've posted that in the general channel, and it's what we're going to be using it for sure is the Sci-Fi Invitational. That we will be having 2 Sci-Fi Invitationals in 2024. I think one tournament will be happening in April, and the next will be happening in October. But there's also the chance I will probably find a way or think of a way that members of the Slack can get one. I'm not totally positive on that, but just FYI, check that out. And if you are wanting the Obi-Wan Dooku promo and you haven't got it, make sure you fill out the Google form or reach out to me. I'll get it. And last thing, we encourage everyone to submit games on their Zion's Finest Google form that we have pinned in the general chat. And that's all we have. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy this episode.
All right, so we're going to talk about some recent games. So, Kenny, what have you been playing lately?
So, I have been, in honor of Justin, I have been playing a lot of Lumi. So, what happened was, for those of you who do not know, Justin Chavez in our local group has been a partisan of Lumi for a long time. And I was thinking that he was using Lumi as kind of so he's running Lumi with Dooku, and I thought that he is using Lumi as a different iteration on Ahsoka Dooku. So I wanted to try it out in order to see if it worked. And it turns out that Ahsoka Dooku and Lumi Dooku are two very different lists in terms of what Lumi is adding and what Ahsoka is adding. So the purpose of Ahsoka is to provide this really fast, really defensive tech piece that is very strong into heavy aggro like Vader Grievous. What Lumi is doing is leveraging your ability to consistently wound enemy figures in order to dash and swarm the map. So it's kind of like what Separatists are doing, but it's a little, and it's not quite as flexible in terms of Kraken. He's doing all of these dashes and things like that. But the ability to do it off of wounds makes for a really interesting, I think it's a very strong ability. A very strong ability. Mm-hmm. So I've been playing Lumi, Dooku, just a bunch. I'm just getting a ton of reps on it.
And who are your secondaries and supports there?
Okay, so it's the Dooku and Company box. So the best box in the game.
Django Magnus.
Dooku, Django Magnus. It is the best box in the game. If there is one list, if I were to tell someone, if someone were to say, what box should I get in order to play Shatterpoint? I would say, would you like to win or do you want to have fun? If you want to have fun, do whatever you want. If you want to win, buy the Dooku box and then buy the Grievous box, right? The Dooku box is, I do think, I know that Vader is probably the maybe quote unquote the best unit in the game.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
I disagree with that too. But I mean, Dooku, Django, and Magnus are three best in class.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So they are the core. And to be honest, Lumi does not work, I think, without them. Right. Yeah. I think it is very tough we've talked about this. We've tried this and other things, but
and the consideration there is that in order to really leverage Lumi's flow the force ability, you need to have enough presence on the board that you are consistently wounding, that you are doing things with your other units.
Yeah.
She benefits from having strong units around her.
Yes.
And if she doesn't have those, then she is just doing nothing on the table.
And we'll talk about this later in the episode, but that is exactly it. So then I've been trying a bunch of things with her. I have ran her with bow. I like running her with bow and soups. And the reason why is because that makes me think it's an interesting kind of premier list where bow and soups, they're not going in any other list. So the idea is that as I'm building a premier list, Dooku's my core, and then Lumi, bow, soups is one of my squads. Ahsoka, Obi-2, Clan Kryze is another one of my squads. It just makes for some interesting lists. And it's been awesome. So I played 2 games last week with Scott, and I think I did run. Yeah, I just ran that list twice. He played Anakin Padme the first time, and then he played he played Vader Grand Inquisitor as a second list. So Scott said that he didn't want. So I said, you should run Vader Grievous because I want to see how this works. And Scott said, well, I think I just roll you if I run Vader Grievous. And so I want to try this other thing, which is fine. But it ended up being the case that I was able to. Dooku Lumi is really, really strong if you are not fighting a ton of aggro. And while he did have Vader Grand Inquisitor is not as much aggro as Vader Grievous, right? Yeah. So I was able to beat him both of those games. And then we just played a game tonight where I ran the Republic, and we were trying to do an inverse of where putting Lumi in a different matchup.
Yeah. So in terms of my recent games, the one I'll talk about first is my game against Curtis. So I've been kind of doing a grand tour of revisiting things in Republic that are bad to see how they feel in Sabotage Showdown.
Yes.
Because I think that objective is quite a bit better for what Republic wants to do in shifting priorities.
Yep.
So I just ran the Obi-Wan box straight up and down, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi, Cody, 212.
Yep.
And then the Lumi box straight up and down, Luminara, Barriss, and Clone Commandos.
Yep.
Curtis was playing Dooku box.
Okay.
Dooku, Django Magnus.
Yep.
And then he was running it with
Cad Bane. Wasn't he?
No, I believe it was Grievous, Obi-2 B2s.
Okay. So
the best. No, it was Maul Obi-2 B2s.
Okay.
So it was I was if you look at our tier lists, the only unit that I was running that was above a C tier in those lists was Kenobi.
Yeah.
And he was running all of the A and S tier stuff.
Yeah.
Just, Maul plus Separatist good stuff.
Maul is so good. I mean, we talk about how good Dooku is.
Yeah.
Maul is so good.
Yep. I was really pleasantly surprised by the strength of some of those weaker units in Republic.
Okay.
I lost the game, but it was close. I made a fight of it.
Okay.
I think that some of that is me figuring out, getting the reps in to figure out how to run Republic in a functional way.
Yeah.
Some of it is also the objective, and some of it is I think that there is some room for those units to succeed. Lumi did work.
Yeah.
Barris, I think we have rated really low in the past, but she can be really great as a displacement piece.
Yes.
And I think we'll talk about that more later.
Yep.
Kenobi, he's my favorite primary in the game. I think he's still very solid.
Kenobi's awesome.
And it turns out that when your 212 have access to dice rerolls from Cody, they actually can do some work.
Yeah.
Cody also is very interesting because in a lot of ways, Sabotage Showdown should be exactly where he wants to be.
Yeah.
Because the objectives are much closer together.
Yes.
He's much more likely to get his free expose off. He's much less likely to need to use movement, so he can just focus and attack people.
Yes.
He does still, even with all of the focus and the sharpshooter and all the stuff, he does sometimes struggle to climb his tree.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
Yeah.
I do think that when you climb his tree, you're primarily looking to leverage the shoves on the top part of his attack tree rather than the strict damage.
Yeah.
And he can sometimes do some stuff. His rerolls are phenomenal.
Yeah.
The biggest problem that Cody has, in my opinion, is that OB2 just completely shuts him down.
Oh, man, that's so true.
Because, his tactics ability, you can expose a unit, but if that unit is within mind trick range, if you attack them, he can mind trick. The exposed stays
because they don't roll dice.
But you have to change your targets.
Yeah, and you've done all the setup.
If you focus, you lose the focus. From that first attack.
Oh.
And so you're going from even if you don't get the expose, if you focus, you're going from a 9-die attack on Cody. He mind tricks you, and you're like, well, I guess I got to make a 4-die attack.
Oh, that hurts so bad.
And it's just it makes it really difficult for him to do anything.
Yeah.
Mind trick is just a beast. So all of that said, I was really pleasantly surprised by my ability to make a game of it, running kind of some of the worst units in the game against some of the best units in the game.
Yeah.
So I do think the Sabotage Showdown does some work. The other game that we played just tonight, I was running Separatist droids. It was Grievous Kraken B2s, with then Luminara, Kalani, and B1s. I wanted to run this for two reasons. The first is I was looking around on the Longshanks data and saw that Lumi Grievous actually has a really high win rate on Longshanks, and I was surprised about that. And I figured, well, it makes sense. Separatists are good at killing people. You throw Lumi in there, you can leverage that dash.
Yeah.
We also landed on the B1 variant primarily because as a premier option, often you because you have a spot for Django Magnus. It is hard sometimes to figure out what do you do for a third or fourth squad. So if you can run Lumi kind of with the extras, how does that feel? You were playing...
I was playing Mace Kenobi, and it was just very standard Mace Kenobi. Kenobi with Rex and Commandos.
Which is my favorite list in the game. I love it. It's great. So you thumped me pretty hard.
The dice variant, this was a game where our dice variance was very strong. And it was particularly acute at just some brutal breakpoints. You were unable to wound. You were unable to wound my ARF troopers who had come up a little bit in order to...
you position them very aggressively.
Because the idea...
And you should have been punished based on my experience there. And I just...
What I was hoping was... I moved my ARF troopers up. They had 2 hunker tokens, and I had cover. So my thought was that I would take a shot, not get 1 shot, and then be able to dash away, was kind of the idea. And force you to kind of come up, so bring you up, so then Mace is able to go up and deliver the killing blow, and you were 1 damage short of wounding them, right? And so now your B2s are up there, they're a lot closer for Mace, and then that just happened at multiple points in the game, where you rolled tons of failures, tons of expertises, and... just like those, and they were brutal breakpoints, right? And I one-shot Grievous with Mace, which was wild.
I rolled 4 failures and an expertise, and he was exposed.
And he was exposed, right?
So you just one-shot Grievous.
So I one-shot Grievous, and then I one-shot... I one-shot Grievous. Obi-Wan with the damage from Commandos was able to one-shot your B1s. And so that was just kind of how the game went. It was very interesting because I played Republic a lot when we were... starting into the game, and then kind of peeled away from them. And it's been really interesting playing Dooku and Ahsoka and like more focusing on these control lists and now playing Republic, where Mace and Obi-Wan are I'm thinking about this in terms of primary matchups because Mace in a lot of ways is like Dooku but offensive.
Yeah.
And Ahsoka is not at all like Obi-Wan, but she is similar in that they are very defensive units that are able to kind of be forwardly advanced. Obi-Wan's interesting because you don't want him going first. You're reserving him and doing all that stuff. But it's very interesting being able to put those guys up while you really want your clones to stay back as much as possible and just leverage their coordinated fire, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the conclusion that I came to, at least, and I've played the Grievous Luminara in a couple of variants.
Yeah.
I think that it is potentially very good.
Yes.
If you are running Jango and Magna Guards in there.
Yeah.
So I think that if you sub out Kraken for Jango, and if, just generally speaking, if your list has Jango and Magnas, they're going to lift the ability of every single other thing that list is trying to do.
Yeah.
But the idea of the experiment where we were trying to say, can we get another squad that is separatist focused in there? I think it's fine, but I think that Lumi is not the right choice.
Yeah.
Because you just don't have enough offensive punch.
Yes.
You don't have any displacement in the list.
Which is huge.
Unless you roll shoves on your attacks, which is a big deal.
Yep.
And so if you sub Lumi out for Maul, suddenly he can, suck people off of points.
Yep.
So I think that there is room to do something like that with Maul or maybe with some other, units in the game.
Yeah.
That provide a little bit more control and displacement. But in general, if you're trying to go Grievous Luminara, you just kind of end up optimizing back towards the Dooku Luminara list.
Yeah.
That is just, I think, a better version of
or like the Grievous Maul list, right?
Exactly.
Like, so you're going like in these. So, and well, let's talk about this. So what this episode, what we want to do is we've been playing the game for 6 months, and we want to do this reassessment. We want to think about units that are stronger than we thought and units that are weaker than we thought. And do we want to start with Ahsoka or should we start with Lumi and kind of continue?
Let's start with Luminara because that's where we've been.
So we should say, initially, when Luminara came out, I was super sweet on her because I'm like, oh, she's got this really cool ability. Flow of the Force is really awesome. But then everyone started running Vader Grievous. I was running Lumi Obi-Wan and just got worked.
Yep.
Because the problem with Lumi is that, and you know this as well as I do, is that Lumi does not work with the Republic because they are not able to leverage either end of Flow of the Force. They're not defensive enough in order to soak up attack so that when she's able, when your units are wounded, she can pass out heals because everyone's just getting one shot, right? And they're not offensive enough to be able to trigger her free dashes off of wounds, right?
I agree with that. With a caveat, I think that there's potentially a place for Luminar in Republic.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where you have to be positioning perfectly. You have to be playing really well.
Yes.
And it doesn't work against super aggro lists.
Yes.
So if you're playing against more displacement control lists that are doing more, damage in 3 to 4 chunks.
Yes.
Then suddenly her healing when one of your units gets wounded is super relevant.
Yes.
In my Obi Lumi game against Curtis, I healed easily more than 15 damage in that game from Lumi's ability alone.
Yeah.
Because he was pushing people off and occasionally he'd wound somebody, I'd get a heal somewhere else.
Yeah.
So like that can matter. I think there's room for that, but you have to build around what she's trying to do.
Yeah. And you have to know, I mean, I think the problem was what I thought at least when she was initially released, was I've got these clones and I'm running into Vader or I'm running into Grievous or I'm running into Vader Grievous or I'm running into Dooku and I'm just not able to like get enough. And I didn't know how to position really at the time, right? And so initially we rated her very low.
Yep. So when we did even as recently as when we did our primary unit tier list, I was not present for that episode. And so I think that all of the Galactic Republic primaries were underranked severely because I was not there to advocate for them.
I was trying, but it was very hard.
But I do think that, even in those cases, though, I think that Kenny mentioned this on the Slack the other day, which is like, it turns out Luminar is great when you run her with good units.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because Lumi's ability is, and this is a part of the reassessment. So what happens is Justin Chavez starts talking about how he's been running Lumi Dooku. And we're like, well, you're running Lumi with the best box in the game. It's going to be fine, right? But then...
not just the best box in the game, but also Obi-2.
Also Obi-2. That's true. He was running Obi-2.
Yeah. So you're running it, and then I think his other support there, he's running Super Commandos.
He was running Supes, yeah.
And so it's sort of like, okay, you're running Luminara with 4 S tier units, right?
Like, what is that? It doesn't say anything, right? And so initially, I was super skeptical about it.
Yeah.
But once you play it, you realize, oh, if you're able, the dash is so powerful. It is such a powerful ability. Now, Lumi's problem is that, kind of like Ahsoka, she's going to do very little on her activation.
Yep.
Because she's slow. She has a dash for a force, which doesn't feel great. And she has no like free displacement or anything like that, right? And so on her activation, you don't feel good. But Mano Live, the ability to you're being able to peek at the top of your card for your order deck is excellent. And when you're able to wound somebody, that you're the one who's able to dash is so good. And with Dooku, when your units are wounded, you're able to dash, right? And so now she just becomes, she just adds this really dynamic presence onto the field with Dooku and or with strong units. I don't think she's only good with Dooku. But I became a convert. I realized I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, Flow of the Force is an unbelievably strong ability.
The other thing that I think, caveat that I want to add into this conversation as we're talking about things that are better or worse than we thought.
Yeah.
I think it's really common in the game right now to try to compare everything against like the best of what's in the game.
Yes.
So like, I think that it's really natural to compare everything to like, well, what does this secondary do compared to Jango?
Yeah.
What do these supports do compared to Magna Guards?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important consideration.
Yeah.
But I also think it's important to realize that like, those 2 units are outliers that break the curve.
Hardcore.
And it's really important when we're assessing units to consider them not just against those 2, but against the rest of the field in the game.
Yeah. See, and my problem, and this was my initial problem with Lumi, was after having played her, and especially once Mace came out, the question became, why would I ever run Lumi over Obi and Mace, right? Because Obi is providing your team with the defense that they desperately need, and Mace is providing steadfast and protection and a figure that you always want to Shatterpoint, right? And so Obi and Mace are just incredible Republic primaries, even if we think Republic is a bit undertuned. And Lumi, it just doesn't, it's not clear how she fits. And then you realize, oh, well, that's not her fit, right? Her fit is in this other kind of archetype running with these really strong units. And now Flow of the Force becomes this very strong ability, proactive ability. I mean, Scott was just demoralized when we played our 2 games because every time I'm wounding his figure, he's like, okay, you know, if you're not running a reactive piece, I'm going to wound you and I'm going to get a dash, maybe even swing 2 points. All right.
It's wild.
It feels really strong.
Yeah. You only need to do that thing where you wound somebody and flip 2 points in one activation.
Yeah.
Like once or twice in a game,
and you
just win.
Yeah, 100%.
And so it's really powerful. It doesn't always trigger that way.
Yeah.
But even so, like you can do things where you wound and you take a point and then you're moving a second piece onto that point to shore it up to make it hard for your opponent to flip it back.
Yeah.
It can be really, really strong.
Yeah.
The other general rule that I want to lay out that I think was a really common mistake that we made early on is that it's really, especially with primaries, you just kind of look at like how much damage can they do?
Yes.
What are their big swings?
Yep.
And how do they step up and do things?
Yeah.
And I think Ahsoka is kind of the pitch perfect example of this.
Yeah.
A lot of people really did not like Ahsoka at first when she came out, and a lot of people still don't like her because they're sort of like, she doesn't do anything when she attacks.
Yes.
She has this cool interrupt where she can advance when one of her units get wounded and make a 5-die attack. But a 5-die attack on her kind of doesn't really do anything.
It's not very strong.
And it was very hard, or it was very common for people to sort of be like, well, I'm going to roll up with her and swing for the fences, and then she just doesn't do what I need her to, and then I just want to play somebody else.
Yes.
And so talk to me about where you found a different space for Ahsoka.
Yeah, so that was actually my story. Was what happened was I was maining Ahsoka, and I was running Ahsoka Maul. Really, I was just running Ahsoka with everything initially, and just could not get it to work. Could not figure out Ahsoka's not doing damage. It wasn't working. So I actually shelved Ahsoka and was not playing her. And then what happened was when Vader Grievous comes out and we are looking for an answer to the heavy aggro, Sam talks about how there's Ahsoka Dooku, right? Now, Ahsoka is like Lumi in that she works when she is running with Obi-2, Jango, and Magnus and Dooku, but she's able to work with them in a very interesting kind of way. Because now what Ahsoka is not a figure that you plan to do a lot on your activation, but like Lumi, she is a figure that you are a primary, you are very confident going early. They can go up and take points and hold on to points, right? And just put a lot of pressure on the map that way. She's very difficult to move away. And so I just learned she is just a pressure tempo piece, but not for damage, but just for control. Yep. And the excellent thing about her ability is her protector ability is your units get wounded. And if your opponent isn't timing it correctly, and sometimes they can't, or timing it properly, then she can dash or she can advance and snag that spot back, right? So you're not planning on her doing hardly anything on her activation, and instead what you're doing is you're using her to create defensive pressure and just put your opponent in hard choices, right?
Particularly against the Vader Grievous
Exactly.
list. That list very much builds its advantage by saying, I'm going to one-shot everything.
Yep.
And get force refresh from doing it.
Yep.
And like so the damage that I take doesn't matter because I'm just doing so much more damage than you, and I'm scoring so quickly. And what the Ahsoka Dooku list does is it says, okay, well, you're all melee attacks.
Yeah.
You can attack Dooku.
Yep.
And wound him. You can attack Ahsoka and wound him.
Nope.
You can attack Obi-2 and wound him.
Nope.
Magna Guards are going to complicate things.
Yep.
And like you can maybe one-shot them, but it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so basically it allows you to, especially in the early game, put bodies on points that are then difficult for Vader Grievous to immediately flip and get a scoring advantage.
Which is that is completely opposite of what they're doing normally, where they're just killing everybody, right?
Exactly. So I've been thinking about a variation on the same idea that's running a Republic core around Mace.
Yeah.
Because you talked about Mace being similar to Dooku in a lot of ways, but more offensively pitched.
Yeah.
And so if you look at a Mace Ahsoka kind of a pairing with some Republic units, trying to basically, it's not going to work exactly the same way as Ahsoka Dooku, but firing in a similar way.
We have figured out like what to do with Ahsoka and how she can work in these like lists. And so you run her in that and you'll be happier with her.
I think Asajj fits in a very similar category for me.
Yeah.
I think she's less solved than I would like her to be.
Yeah.
We generally have rated her pretty low, and I don't know that I've necessarily changed that opinion. Force push is really strong.
Yes.
Her mobility is incredible.
Yes.
She is defensively very weak.
Yes.
And offensively, she's not going to hit hard. And I think the mistake that I know I made a lot and that I generally see people make is they attack with her damage side. Because you look at it, you're like, oh, you get an extra die. There are a lot more little damage symbols on there. That feels great.
Yes.
And I think the reality is that she very rarely is going to get more than 3 successes on either side.
Yeah.
And the stance card side, where she is getting multiple shoves in those 3 steps, is so much more immediately impactful than the damage side, that I think she just kind of stays in that shove side most of the time. I think there's a general error where especially early on, we overvalued damage and we underrated the impact of shoves and displacement.
Yes.
The other thing about Asajj is that she can do things that no other primary can do.
Yeah.
It's expensive sometimes, but I have had multiple games playing her recently where I've like flip her over and I'm like, wow, you know what? I have the force budget to do it. And the best thing that she can do right now is move, double jump, and force push somebody up a point.
Yeah.
And then take cover.
Yeah.
And she's not attacking. She's not doing any damage.
Yep.
But she's making a huge impact on the board. I think there's more potential for her, especially in the future, if we see that some of the damage ramp scales back a little bit in the game.
Yeah.
If we see some adjustments that way, I think displacement is strong, is what I'm trying to say, and she's a tool that can do that for you.
Let's talk about Barriss in light of that, because Barriss is a figure, again, I mean, what happens is, so Matt has been maining Republic since the beginning.
Yeah.
I have mained the Republic when it was released, and then I dropped it like a rock.
Yep.
And Barriss is a good example of where I think we miscalculated.
Yep.
And I play Barriss. I'm playing her with Mace and Obi, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. She's adding more dice. She's just following Mace and giving him more dice, which is very cool. But it doesn't feel as strong. But what we've learned, again, with the value of shoves and things like that, is also diceless displacement, right?
Yeah.
So Morgan Reed, who won the recent TTS tournament. I don't know where. I think
the Hello There TTS tournament.
Oh, it was Hello There. It wasn't the general one.
Yeah.
Okay. So Morgan Reed's obviously a very good player, and he has an episode where he talks with Hello There, and they talk about this. He has this rule where his lists have each of his lists. So every list he brings, so he has 2 squads, has 2 forms of diceless displacement. So he has Maul, he has Mama T, he has Barriss, he has Django. And the idea there is that I want every squad to have access to somebody who can do diceless displacement. Because here's the thing. So like in the list you were running, Lumi, Grievous, droids, Mace, you have to attack him in order to move. He has steadfast and incredible defense. Yep. So he's very difficult to remove. If you have Maul or Mama T or Django or anybody, then you're just like, hey, Mace is off the point, right?
Yep.
And so we've learned like with Barriss, like Barriss's value And so what Morgan was doing was he was running a Vader core, and then he has Dooku, Barriss, Magnus, which I honestly think is just kind of brilliant. And the idea there is that Barriss's weak thing is she is a very defensively weak. She is extremely easy to kill. But with Dooku, it's like, that's fine. Like, you wound her, and then I'm going to be able to do all of my things, right?
Yeah. Dooku's giving you force refresh so you can actually afford to force push.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and with Jango. Vader is, if Vader's your core, she has access to additional dice when necessary, you know. And so Barriss is a figure that I feel like we rated down because we're thinking about her naturally in this place of Republic where she's not able to consistently do what she's doing. But also, honestly, I think that was more, we just misjudged the value of diceless displacement. I think Barriss could work in Republic, right?
Yeah, I think so. That she's the secondary that I'm thinking about in that Mace Ahsoka list under Ahsoka. For exactly that reason, Mace is giving you a little bit more force budget flexibility.
Exactly.
And she's kind of being a poor man's OB2 with Republic synergy in that list to try and displace people, try to, move people around. So I think Barriss has a lot of potential, but she really does sit in the place where it's sort of like, she gives you access to diceless displacement in this secondary slot.
Yeah.
She's worse at it than Jango.
Oh, yeah.
She is still worse than OB2.
Oh, yeah.
But she is pretty solid as a third or fourth pick.
Yeah.
If that's the impact that you're looking for in that slot.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. Okay, so one unit that initially we rated, I don't think we rated it low. We rated it lower comparatively was Clan Kryze.
Yeah. And maybe let's talk about Clan Kryze and Super Commandos together.
Okay, that's a great idea. Actually, you talk about Super Commandos.
Yeah. So I know very early on, the conventional wisdom in the larger community was Super Commandos are just better than Clan Kryze.
Yep.
You just always take them every single time.
More health.
The main thought there was you want bodies to go stand on points and contest them. Super Commandos are positioned to do that, whereas Clan Kryze are a little bit squishier, and they want to attack from range.
Yep.
And so that does some funny things to... And the Super Commandos will punish people from trying to leave engagement. Yep. They can lock units down.
Yeah.
They can do some cool stuff. So the general wisdom was Super Commandos are just better.
Yeah.
What we locally have actually really swung to prefer Clan Kryze, primarily because Super Commandos just kind of feel like a bad version of Magnus.
Yeah.
And when Magnus are everywhere, and when Super Commandos are going up against Magnus, they just lose that fight every single time.
Every single time.
And Magnus are doing bodyguard and other things and they have that out of activation mobility. So the jump and the other action economy that Super Commandos give you is fine.
Yeah.
I know Justin really loves the Super Commandos as a piece of lockdown in that Dooku Ahsoka list.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a certain amount of sense where you already have Magnus on the table.
Yeah, sure.
And where you also have OB2 on the table to further juggle where people can attack.
Yeah.
But we have really swung to liking Clan Kryze because the fact that they have, sharpshooter is great.
Yep.
The fact that they have your choice of pin into shove or shove into shove and the first two steps on their tree is phenomenal.
Yeah. It's the best 2 steps in the game, right?
It really is. And the fact that they can do that at range, they can do some really cute things.
Yeah.
I have had games where a single Clan Kryze attack completely shut out a Vader activation.
Yep.
Because they push him away.
Yep. Pin him.
Yep. And then they say, great, you're pinned and you're out of position.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do on your activation?
Yeah.
You can move and attack.
Yeah.
I have had other games where if they're able to finish off a Vader or a Maul or somebody that has a dash attack response, they can just say, nope, you don't get to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And they're so, and they are, while they are not as defensive they have 7 health as opposed to the 8, and you're not really running them. They don't need to run with bow.
No.
But that's fine because you're kind of running them you've talked about this, Mando's Clan Kryze is a good clone trooper, right? Where they're not meant to be up front. If they're up front, they're gonna die, right? But honestly, clone commandos are gonna die. I'm sorry, Super Commandos are going to die, right? They're not they have 1 more health, but they don't have protection unless they're in the bow bubble. And so they're this very strong positional piece that's playing on the back line that you can make swings with because of how consistently they're able to push men, even if they're not doing a ton of damage.
It is also, I think, just like Luminara, worth adding a caveat that part of where we see the Clan Kryze Mando shine is when you're running them in a list that also has Dooku and Jango and Magnus.
Of course.
Right? Because those are all units that are creating a forward pressure
Absolutely.
that they can stand behind.
Yes.
They're beefy bodies.
Yes.
And then Clan Kryze can shove units off and then either join them on the point or just shove them off to flip the point with another body there.
I do think that is actually a huge and very important
Yep.
caveat, is they need that kind of beefy midline, right?
Yep.
In order to, so that they're not like the first line of attack.
Yep.
And also that was where we learned, like, Bo, initially, Matt and I have talked about this, because Matt and I talk about a lot of things. But one of the things is we overestimated Bo and Commandos, especially their durability.
Yep.
Right. Like, we thought, well, with protection, steadfast, and 8 health, and Bo has amazing expertise.
Yep.
We were like, oh, they're going to be able to do this, and they are very defensive units, but not like to anchor that kind of midline like figures like Ahsoka, Dooku, Jango, Magnus, right?
Yep.
And so,
one of the other things that's really tricky about some of this stuff is that whenever you have protection that is, and this is something I'm just barely learning to appreciate. When you have protection that is keyed to positioning,
yes,
you're contesting an objective,
yes,
or even makes you're engaged with a unit,
yes,
because damage is applied at the end of the attack.
Yep.
If they can shove you out of range to turn off that protection mid-attack,
yep,
the protection goes away.
Yep.
And I think Bo, especially, she gets steadfast, but
it's only range 3.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty tight band, right? For Bo needs, so Bo's ability is Mandalorians within range 3 that are contesting an active objective gain protection and steadfast. So those are 2 triggers. Yep. They need to be contesting an objective and within range 3 of Bo, and you would be surprised at how often that is not the case, right?
Or how often you can, even through steadfast with shoves, change that calculus so that you can turn off that protection.
Yeah.
So that hurts.
Yeah. I mean, so Clan Kreese, better than we thought.
Mm-hmm.
Super Commandos, a little worse than we thought. Although I think things are always kind of like in a position of flux, but Clan Kreese is certainly better than we thought.
Absolutely. We also want to talk about Night Sisters and Savage. I think we are generally very fond of Talzin, and we think that she's great.
Mom is awesome.
And the question is, does her supporting cast do enough to bring her along? I know Dizzard from Rogue Support is really, really sweet on the Night Sister box.
Yes.
And I'll recommend, if you're a Night Sister fan or if you want to learn more about that, you should listen to Rogue Support.
Literally every single podcast they talk, it doesn't matter what they're talking about. They did a recent episode on the Galactic Republic, like running the Galactic Republic, and the intro was them just talking about how much they were like, oh, recent games we played. Oh, I played Mama, right? Because Mama T's awesome, right? So they talk about her a lot, and they have a lot of reps with Mama.
In our tier list, I think part of how we assess them was, we caught some flack from Diz specifically about rating Night Sisters too low.
Yeah.
But we
rated them as a C, I think. Right?
Yeah, we rated them pretty low. And we were sort of like, Savage just doesn't quite do very much on his activation. And Night Sisters just kind of feel like if they were clone troopers, they would be the best clone troopers in the game.
Which is so funny.
But they don't have the Republic tag, and so their synergies that they have are just different.
Yeah.
I've played Talzin a little bit more since then. My opinions have changed somewhat. I was actually really pleasantly surprised at Savage's ability to just be a beefy potato that sits on an objective.
Yeah.
Particularly because after having played a lot of Galactic Republic and appreciating that that's exactly what clone trooper style units want.
Yes. Is
somebody else that can be defensively strong and stand on a point that they can then attack into from the back line to push off or wound or make an impact.
Because he has protection and steadfast that is not that is just totally free.
And 10 health.
And 10 health.
And he gets some out of activation movement.
Yes.
Right? So all of those things together, Night Sisters have some cute things in terms of adding extra dice. One of the dynamics that they have that's actually very cool is their ability that gives them extra dice can trigger from each other.
Yes.
And so one of the intended play patterns there is that you move 1 up to melee engage so that the range attack hits really hard.
Yeah.
I think that Night Sisters and the Talzin box in general actually does work pretty well as a stand-up box. And this is, again, where I come back to comparing Savage against the rest of the field. Yeah. He is not Jango. He is not OB2.
That's true.
He is also not a Rex.
Yeah.
Right. He is not a secondary who's going to do really, really incredible things during his activation.
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is that you get baited by his card because his card says you want him to walk up and attack primaries and kill them.
Yeah.
And then he can't actually do it. And
he cannot do that.
Why did I bring you?
Yeah, exactly.
And the answer is his job is to walk up onto a point that to either to be a second body onto that point.
Yes.
Or to secure a point that you're already there. Or even just to say I can't flip any points right now. Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily need to. Yep. And so he's going to create pressure on a point and deal some good damage so that my other units can follow up later. Yeah,
because the thing is again, Savage is, in my opinion, so when we're talking about this reassessment, I am still not super sweet on Sisters or Savage. And Savage, my problem is he doesn't have a shove. He has no shoves. Mm-hmm. And so Matt's, I think, Matt, you're right in terms of thinking like this is how he's meant to be leveraged, right? Like this durable body that is difficult to remove, so then you can continue to follow up with pressure.
And often I think what you were doing with him, especially, is leveraging his out of activation movement to get him onto points before he activates.
Great point.
Or outside of his activation.
Yeah.
So that if you're in a situation where it's like, okay, he got shoved off.
Yeah.
Great, but Talzin activates. She gives him a dash to put him back on the point.
Yep.
She makes a big attack onto that point.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you can flip that with his body.
Yeah. Mama T is so good.
Yeah. So I was previously in the position where it was like, I think Talzin is good. I think Night Sisters are a little lackluster, but you take them. But maybe you don't always take Savage.
Yeah.
And maybe you take a Dathomirian primary instead.
Yeah.
But the more I think about Premier, the more that I've played them, I think like you do just run the Talzin box.
I think in Premier, that is the way to think about it, right? If you're not optimizing. Diz says, and I think this is really interesting because he says that he runs Mama with Savage when he is running Vader, because Vader is able to make Savage really hum, right? Because he's taking that damage, which is generally fine because he's still not going to get one shot. And then he's really threatening some spikes, right? And so that's an interesting point. But I think for Premier, I think you still just run the box, right?
I think the cute thing that I think I remember seeing Diz talk about is he actually puts Savage as the secondary under Vader.
Oh,
and
that's
then puts like Django under Talzin, and then you have another squad that has Maul in it.
Okay.
And so you can sort of like you only run Savage with Vader. I think that's cute, but I think that in general, you're better off just running the Talzin box as the Talzin box because there are so many better things to be doing with Vader.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, you'd never want because
like if you're running Vader on your list, you're probably making Vader a core feature of your list.
Yeah,
he's not your fourth squad.
No, he's not your fourth. If he is, then wow, you must be running a really strong squad. Okay, one other thing, and this is the last thing in terms of things that are stronger than we thought, and this is just our things about how we think the Separatists is a really strong faction, is out of activation movement, right? Yep. Also why we think Lumi's good, right? Yep. The ability to move figures when it is not that figure's activation and swarm the board and put your opponent in a place where they're not going to have, they will just be facing a bevy of bad options is the way to do it, right? Yep. So Kraken is moving droids. Kalani is moving a ton of droids if they start close to him. Dooku is moving when your figures get wounded. Ahsoka's the same, right? These abilities to react or proactively swarm can just put a ton of pressure on your opponent and is way stronger than we initially thought, right?
Absolutely.
Winning on tempo as board space as opposed to tempo as damage is something that we have learned is a very strong ability. Right?
And then maybe the way to think about that as well is often what you were trying to do during the activation is move a body onto a point and then push an opponent's body off that point.
Yeah.
And if you have the ability to move bodies without activating them, without spending actions on that, that's an incredible economy win.
Yeah, just like that's it. It's an action economy thing, which is such a good point. So, I mean, if I think the general rule is, Morgan Reed has this rule of 2 forms of diceless displacement. I think being able to respond in terms of having out of activation movement reactively or proactively is something you should really think about when you're building lists.
Absolutely. There are only a couple of things that we wanted to talk about in terms of maybe overestimating them or being weaker than we thought. Let's talk about General Kenobi. Yeah. I have my partisan opinions about him for sure.
But I think this is why I'm glad we are talking about this, because I think that Matt especially, is kind of uniquely leveraged to discuss. So the thing about Obi-Wan, when Obi-Wan was released and when we were playing the game, Obi-Wan's ability, his leadership ability is incredibly strong. Mm-hmm. The ability to hold on to hunker tokens, gain more dice, and then be able to heal and move is an extremely strong ability. Besides Vader, maybe Dooku, one of the strongest leadership abilities in the game. Okay. But what I learned, or what I was thinking as I was playing, is that the Republic was not able to leverage the defense that he was supplying well enough in terms of, because what you want, if you're giving your figures more defense, you want that to be to preventing your opponent from hitting breakpoints, so that then you're able to, snowball this value attrition advantage. And I just found that he wasn't able to do that, which is why I was rating him lower than I would have thought initially. No, what do you think about that?
So I think that is accurate. I do think that some of that is just a positioning thing.
Yes.
One of the things that I have found, especially in Sabotage Showdown, is that it is often very, very possible to position your defensively weak clone troopers in such a way where there's just no incentive for your opponent to attack them.
Okay.
right? Especially like if they're standing on a backline point,
Yes.
and if you have two bodies from two different units or more
Yeah.
contesting a single point, often your opponent is going to look at that and say, even if I can get there,
Yeah.
I can't flip the point.
Yeah.
The damage is not going to matter.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to have to do something else.
Yeah.
And that can be a really impactful thing.
Yes.
I think that the knowledge and defense, like heal and dash thing, is much more relevant on like primaries and secondaries in Republic than it is on clone supports. And I think that Kenobi as a piece, like he's my favorite like unit in the game probably.
Yeah, he's so awesome.
I think he is such a phenomenal toolbox piece because he is very mobile. He has a jump. Mm-hmm. His attacks are very, very consistent.
Super consistent.
He does, I would say, like pretty average damage for a primary.
Yeah, he's doing seven
solid damage, but he does not have spike potential.
No.
Because he's getting, like, his tree is limited.
He's getting maxing out at 9 damage.
Right? Yep. But he also has access to a decent number of shoves.
Yes.
And on his Suresu side, that side is very interesting because in some ways it's like, well, on a Taro side, you do more damage and you have more shoves. And you have better defenses.
And you have conditions.
Have conditions. So, like, why do you go to Suresu? And the answer is Suresu is a more flexible side, and it has a bunch of recover on it.
Yeah.
And so, really, what you do is you leap into the fray with a Taru, and then you say, do you want to attack me?
Yeah.
And if they attack you, then you're flipping to Suresu and saying, attacking me was a mistake.
Yeah.
I'm just going to heal all of that damage and stay in here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Obi-Wan, he is such a strong defensive unit. I think my thing is not that in terms of, do you think, like, is Obi-Wan weaker than you initially thought and you have just gotten better at playing him? I
think Obi-Wan is good. I think that there are other things in the game that are better. And I think that it's more that I underestimated how much better those other things were.
Okay, that's fair.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also think that in a different context, Obi-Wan, if Obi-Wan was Separatist Alliance tagged instead of Republic,
Lord have mercy,
he would be a terror in the metagame.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, and that's so much of what's happening in Republic. Is more so than any other keyword. Everything in Republic is balanced around the context of everything else in Republic.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to get that to fire. And I think that part of the problem is that there are some units in the game that are just, even when you're firing on all cylinders, Republic are still just doing things that are better than what you can do.
Yeah.
And so why bother?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, I think for me, like, I think that Obi-Wan is weaker than I initially thought, only because I have revised my feeling of the Republic down and realized that I was thinking, I don't think Obi-Wan is doing enough. I think that is going to be an opinion that will change as we get more reps in, as we figure it out. I mean, because you really got to approach the Republic with a different mindset, right?
I think my initial thought, I guess one way where my opinion has changed is my initial thought was Kenobi is your build around unit in Republic. Like, he is the center of your list.
No.
And I don't think that's true.
Mace is the center.
I think it's Mace, or it's Vader.
Or Vader, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Or, like, I think you're picking one of your 7 or 6 cost primaries that you're putting Arse under, and you're saying that's my core squad.
Yep.
And then Kenobi is a solid list that you are pairing with that.
Yeah. I mean, Mace is such an extremely good anchor piece. Like, I mean, we people don't give him, I think, the love that he has because they don't like the Republic, but Mace is just such a problem when you're playing against it. So
he is phenomenal on the table.
Yeah. Okay. So one other unit that was weaker than I thought is Republic Commandos. When they were initially released, I was like, oh, these guys are awesome. They have protection, but they are an interest. We've already kind of gone long on this, but I just want to say what is interesting about them. I thought they were strong, but I was not accounting for the fact that they have 6 health, which is a huge problem, right? And not just because it's like, well, that's effectively 7 health. That's true, but that's still low, right? Like that's not, they're not more durable, right? If they're all getting one shot. And the other thing was not having access to shoves, right?
Yes.
ARFs are just better in every way. And so
I think that the other thing about Commandos that's interesting is that they are the clone troopers that are positioned to say, like, we do damage.
Yeah.
Right? They don't shove.
No,
they have some conditions, but it's like, I think they have a pin and they have a strain, but like they're not super relevant a lot of the time.
Yeah.
They do damage when they attack.
Yep.
Their coordinated fire adds damage in.
Yep.
And they're a little bit more durable, but not a lot more durable in terms of standing on points.
Yeah.
So like they are still the best for cost clone sport.
Yes.
But that's a very low bar to clear right now. And I'm hoping that Wolfpack really changes up that situation. For
Yeah,
sure.
I'm really interested in to see how the wolf pack shakes out.
Because they are looking like they're going to be melee focused clones, which if that works, like that sounds great.
Yeah.
But I think that the problem that clone commandos often run into is they can't one shot anything by themselves.
Nope.
And
although they are maxing out at 8 damage, which is kind of wild, but they're never climbing the tree.
They don't get there because they're only rolling 6 dice.
Yes.
And their offensive expertise is middling.
Yes.
So even with ARF Trooper exposed,
yes,
it's like if you get 3 successes, you are happy.
100%.
I did have a game the other day where with ARF Trooper exposed plus Cody rerolls.
Okay.
Right? This was my Obi Lumi game.
Yeah.
My clone commandos did 8 damage to Dooku.
Oh man, that's
like
wild.
In a single act between the two of them.
Yeah, that's cool.
And like they can do stuff. I think part of it though is it's like you also have to have Cody.
Yeah.
And that's a big ask.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
we're running Cody.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like that's part of what I think is interesting or maybe lackluster with Republic is that some of those two, like because the list in general is so synergistic.
Yeah.
If some of those tools are under the curve, there are gaps in the rest of the faction that you just really struggle to fill.
Yeah. So anyway, that's it. Republic Commandos are weaker than we thought. We've talked about that.
Yes.
Okay.
So the other thing we want to talk about in general is like state of the game in terms of nerfs and buffs.
Yeah.
Mostly because this has been a big point of conversation on the Slack about like, oh, it seems like these things are too strong. It seems like these things are too weak. How do we solve for this? And I think it's a really natural conversation to want to have to sort of say, how would I fix this problem?
Yes.
As a way to talk about or identify where those gaps are.
Yeah.
And I think that can be a really productive conversation, but it can also be a really toxic conversation.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about what I think are kind of good policies or like how we try to approach those conversations.
Yeah.
A couple of things that I think are important to be clear about. We have played this game a lot.
We have played a lot.
So like even compared to people that have bought Shatterpoint.
Yeah.
Like we are like really outliers in terms of how much we've been able to play.
We're playing 1 to 2 to 3 games per week.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's important to remember that most people that play this game are casual players.
100%.
And that is good and correct and that's right for the game.
Yeah.
If you have a community of players that are nothing but like competitive tryhards, those games tend to die out really quickly because it's hard for new players to enter in and have fun.
Yeah.
And so we're 6 months in. We feel like we have a pretty good sense of the relative strengths of a lot of things.
Yes.
I think there's plenty of ground to discover. There are a lot of unknowns. And so I think number one is do not let any conversation about things being strong or weak dissuade you from trying things.
Oh, yeah.
Right? There is still ground to explore. We were wrong about Lumi.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
In some ways we were right.
Yeah.
And we've been learning more about that.
Yep. Exactly.
I think that from a game balance perspective, it is definitely way too early for us to expect AMG to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I would be shocked if a year from now, if there are balance changes.
Okay.
And that's probably okay for the vast majority of the player base.
Yeah.
I think we are kind of antsy and would like some units to be changed now.
Yeah.
But I think that there are a number of different reasons why it's fine that that's not the case. Like, there's an overhead when you change rules, especially for casual players, where if they bought things, they don't play for 6 months and they want to come back. Yeah. It's hard to then say, oh, all the stuff that I bought works differently than I remember.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And that dissuades people from wanting to play. And there are other things too. There's the opportunity to balance by addition rather than by making changes to what's already there.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of other things. And I think the number one thing that I want to emphasize is that hardcore players like us need to be comfortable with the idea that the game is often, and I would say rarely the game will rarely be balanced around what we want and around the tournament metagame.
Yeah.
The primary life of the game is making sure that it is fun for your average player, for your casual player.
Yep.
And often that means doing things that are going to be different than what the tournament metagame with the really high hardcore players really want or need.
Yeah.
It's important that there's some level of balance at the top.
Yeah.
Because that will be effective and will trickle down.
Yeah.
But at a certain level of skill, if something is busted because a really skilled player knows how to pilot it well, but your casual player needs the little bit of extra strength there in order to get utility, that can be okay in some cases.
I think that's an excellent point. And I should also say what's really interesting is that it seems like all the content creators who are producing Shatterpoint content, we don't talk about this, but there is a very even without talking about it, we have a very similar kind of group think. Like what's interesting is that Momentous Struggle, Hello There. I mean, lots of people Rogue Support have released episodes talking about making the Republic better, which is something we've all kind of talked about, right? Like, okay, now we're trying to play into the space where we make the Republic better. Hello There just had an awesome 2-part episode where they talked, it was a project they called Nerf, Buff, Pass. And what Jesse and Amon did was they went through every single unit and said, do you nerf it, do you buff it, do you pass? Mm-hmm. Now, they were not doing, if we're going to do all of these changes, but it was more just like an approach to which, to be honest, as I was listening to it, there's a few things that I might have quibbled on, but generally their assessment in terms of what needs to be nerfed, buffed, or passed upon was exactly where I was. Like when they were saying things, I was like, I agree, right? I might be a little more severe or maybe a little less severe, maybe on a margin, but it's really interesting to kind of see us all kind of moving through this space together. And I also think that like Jesse and Amon do a very good job. So they have this, I mean, they have a 2-part episode, Nerf, Buff, or Pass, that they do a very constructive job of explaining. And we try and do this on the Slack when we talk about this, explaining why it is that we think this particular changes need to work, but also realizing none of this needs to happen, right? Like none of this needs to happen for this still to be a great game.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of that laid down, in terms of balance adjustments in the game,
yes,
what do you think needs to be addressed?
I think that this is, to be honest, if I have a very limited wish list, Vader gets nerfed. Okay. His ability, Matt has actually suggested this, and I think this is the correct approach. His identity only gives the extra dice to Force users. I think that's I think it instantly fixes him.
Yeah, I think so. I really like that change, primarily because it's a thematic one.
Yes.
Right? It feels really dumb that you can tempt Magna Guard to the dark side.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And gaining extra power from the dark side should be a thing that you only get to do if you're a Force user.
Yeah. So, with that being the case, I know you're going to say you don't think Vader needs to be nerfed.
Yeah.
I think Vader is still the strongest figure in terms of like by himself what he's doing in the game with this change being made. And I think that it instantly solves a bevy of problems. Okay. I also think magnets need to be nerfed. And my suggested fix for them is that the rightmost crit in each of their expertise trees becomes a hit.
Yeah,
I think that alone, like, I'm like, let's try that. And Django, we delete not so fast. Just delete it from the game. I think I have never seen an ability produce more feels bad man than that. Right. It just, and I have been the one dealing that. I have had Django stop activations occasionally, but more often I have been the one leveraging Django. And to be honest, it doesn't, even though I'm like, oh, it's so cool because I've done some damage to your guys. Now I'm positioning Django to put you in this really bad position. It just leads to a lot of feels bad man, and he doesn't need it. He's still an unbelievably strong figure without it. And then I think that I think clones need to be buffed, but I think that maybe that change, I defer to your judgment. I think that maybe they get an additional health and maybe the 501st gets a damage on their first step on their trait. So that's I know that sounds like a lot, but I'm thinking that's a pretty
that's
conservative.
Pretty conservative.
What do you think about that?
So there's a lot about that I agree with and that I like.
Okay.
Right? So I think unquestionably Django and Magnas are so strong above the curve that they need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
I like that change for Magnas. I also think it's ridiculous that Magnas as a 3-cost support have 10 health.
Oh yeah, great point.
So like they're melee only. I get that. They're bodyguards. I get that.
Still,
but like as a 3-cost support, they have the best offensive expertise in the game. They have the best attack tree in the game. Not even counting supports, it's better than most units. Period.
Absolutely.
They have the most health. They roll 5 defense dice,
and it's 1 and 2 for their expertise conversion. Right. It's literally exactly what you want.
It's crazy good.
Yes,
and they don't feel like a 3-cost support.
No,
and that is a problem, especially when Dooku is just such like. It does not feel like you're actually making sacrifices in order to bring Dooku.
Exactly.
In the same way that you feel like you're making sacrifices with
Mace
to bring pawns, or to bring 501st, or
absolutely,
even to bring B1s.
Yeah.
That's
a good comparison.
Right? Like all of those things. ARF troopers are kind of wreck the curve in a similar way, but it's nowhere near as extreme.
Nothing like it. I mean, I think ARF troopers and B1s I think they are totally fine. I think ARF troopers are better comparatively than B1s. But they are totally fine as 3-cost units.
I think the thing that's more awkward in that conversation is that ARF troopers are just better pound for pound than the 4-cost clone troopers.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is very silly.
Yeah.
I think the ARF Troopers are good but fair 3-cost supports, and I think that like the 4-cost clones are just undertuned a little bit. But so that aside, as far as Django is concerned, I have thought there are a million different ways that you could adjust him.
Yes.
And he kind of has a similar problem where it's like he has a ton of mobility, he has a ton of displacement.
Yes.
I have yelled about Capture Wire a lot, and I actually hate that ability more than I hate
Not So Fast.
Not So Fast.
Yeah.
Because like Not So Fast can create a situation where it just breaks an activation. That is super feels bad, man. That is backbreaking.
Yeah.
You know, that's whatever. And for those reasons, I think it would be great to, like, you could even just change Not So Fast to say, like, it can't wound in some fashion.
Yeah.
So that it's like, it does damage, it's fine, it's whatever.
Yeah.
But
or if it wounds a figure, this is what I've heard, is that the idea is that if a figure is wounded, your opponent draws another card, right? So that their activation isn't break.
Yeah.
They're still wounded, right?
I don't love that because I think part of the symmetry of the game where you're on roughly the same pace through your deck as your opponent
until Vader comes out. Because Vader, right, when he's going to be reshuffling himself back in. But I see what you're saying.
Like, there are some things there that, like, I like about the game.
Agreed.
But Capture Wire, to me especially, seems insane.
So
because
good.
It is Force Push.
Yes.
But it costs one less.
And they get pinned.
Yeah. And the downside, I guess, is, like, it is true that pulling someone towards you is worse than pushing them away.
Yes.
But it is not one force plus a condition much worse.
That's exactly right.
Right?
Yeah.
So I actually think that the fix that I would like to see for Django is you make Capture Wire cost an action.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, because that also makes it so... That's interesting because the idea is that if you hit it on the tree, can you still get it if you hit it on the tree? But then you're still giving up 2 damage and a jump at that point, right? It's a fair trade, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's totally
so, because like because as we've talked about, diceless displacement is so strong.
It's so strong.
Force Push everywhere else costs 2 force.
Yep.
And so if you get it at a discount,
man, that's an interesting idea, man.
You know, like you have to embrace some risk in order to do it.
Yeah.
And
what
like,
if it costs 2 force?
I think if it costs 2 force, that is also fine.
Okay.
I think that is fair. I think that's less interesting of a change.
I think that is. I totally agree. Mm-hmm. What you're saying is it becomes a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
So as far as Vader is concerned, so my general hot take on nerfs in the game right now is I kind of think you could just change Django and Magna's, and that fixes a lot of things.
Yeah, because then Vader Grievous is worse.
Vader and Grievous and Dooku all come down substantially because, like, and we talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
There are so many things in the game that lean on the strength of those units in order to do what they want to do. And I think that, like, especially Magna's, if you were taking some health away, if then suddenly taking extra dice from Vader hurts a lot more.
Yeah.
Because they're a lot more likely
to get wounded. If they're at 8 health, right?
Yeah. So, like, I'm fine. I don't necessarily... So, I think Vader is good.
Yeah.
I think he should be good because he's an iconic Star Wars figure.
Absolutely should be good.
People love him. He should be good.
Yeah.
And I actually really like his place in the metagame where it's like he does not have super designated synergies.
Yeah.
But he is just sort of good within certain contexts.
Yeah.
And that he finds a lot of homes as a splash piece.
Because, again, we're talking like Magna's and Django are so good.
Yeah, but I think that that's a great place for Vader to be. Mm-hmm. I am fine with the idea of a nerf so that his innate only affects Force users.
Yeah.
It is weird because pretty much every innate ability like that in the game is limited in some way, either to keywords or by range.
Yeah.
And this one is not either.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit silly.
It is a little strange.
But I also think that, like, even if Vader's in a context where he's only giving himself the dice, like, he's still a solid figure.
Oh yeah.
But and I think that
because Vader's activations are terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Because he's gonna kill anything, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what you want Vader to do. Right?
Exactly. So, like, I would be totally fine. Like my pick period might just be nerf Django and Magna's and see what else happens.
I think that I mean, to be honest, I think is an iterative approach. That's totally fine.
I think that the obstacle is that with a physical game, it is hard to do an iterative approach.
Yeah.
And so really, like, if they're going to make changes, they have to do them in a lump sum.
Yeah.
And they have to say, we are changing all of these things in this way, and we are trying to future-proof everything to bring the outliers on both sides towards the middle.
Yeah.
And I think the other piece that I would say about that is I think that Republic is stronger than the larger community gives them credit for.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to talk about this in more detail in a future episode.
Yep.
But I think part of it is that their game is really a positioning game.
Yes.
And the way that they play a positioning game is different than how the rest of the game wants you to play. It's kind of different than how shifting priorities, the objective set wants you to play.
Yeah.
So I think that a big part of the barrier with them is that people are positioning them in properly.
Yes, this was 100% my mistake. Yeah. I'm putting people on the midline. You should not be doing that.
Yeah. And that's part of it. And I think that it's okay if there are some units in the game where it's like, okay, yeah, their skill floor is lower.
Yeah.
If you miss position, you're going to get punished hard, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it is pretty unquestionably clear that the design intention for Republic in general, and especially Clone Troopers, is like they're weaker than on average individually, but they're giving you coordinated fire and other value added up over time.
Yes.
And I think that's very cool. And I think some of the fixes that people have suggested were like, oh, make it innate, or, those kinds of things. I don't love those things because I think that I agree with like Sam that innate coordinated fire is just too strong because it changes a couple of different things. It allows you to trigger it more than once in an activation.
Yes.
It makes it free always, and so there's no way to punish it or exact a cost from your opponent.
Yeah.
A lot of those things. I actually think that the larger issue is more that there is not a meaningful power difference between the 3 cost and the 4 cost clone supports. And so making it feel like you actually have an upgrade when you're bringing a 4 cost clone support, I think would do a lot to help some of the more underwhelming 8 cost Republic primaries.
Yeah.
But in general, my kind of weird hot take about this is that I think, again, if you change Jango and Magnus, I think that Republic actually feels pretty good against the rest of the field, even as is.
Yeah, this is your thing, is that when Republic isn't playing into Dooku, Vader, Grievous, they feel fine.
I mean, if you look at the Longshanks data for Mace Windu, he has a really negative win rate against Vader and against Grievous. Yeah. He has a dead even 50% win rate against Dooku.
Okay.
And he is positive against every other primary in the game.
That's so interesting.
And so that matches my experience as well, where it's like you can run Mace Obi and feel good into everything that is not like Vader plus Grievous or Grievous plus Dooku. Yes. And then you're in a sad place.
Yeah.
And so, and that creates some interesting premiere spots, I think, where you're like, okay, I have my all-comers list, and then I need like a counter list.
Yeah.
Which is part of why I'm like a pretty strong advocate for the, like Mace Padme and then Ahsoka Dooku premiere list. Yeah. That's sort of like, I have a hard counter for Vader.
Yep.
And then I run this into everything else and feel great.
Yeah, that's such an interesting idea.
And I think that you could bring those outliers down. I would love to see the clone troopers get a little bit of love. The other thing,
what if they just got like +2 health?
I think +2 health is too much.
Okay.
Because of Kenobi's knowledge and defense.
Yeah.
And because they are ranged units.
Yeah.
And because they can have impact. Like, I think that's probably too much.
Okay.
I think that you could maybe give them an extra defense die.
Okay.
Just across the board.
Okay.
And that would actually feel pretty good.
Okay. I'd be okay with that.
And that would lean a little bit more into this idea that it's like they're trying to prevent damage that's coming in, but if you hit the break point, then they're in trouble.
Yeah. Also rewards positional play.
Rewards positional play.
Yep.
Because it means that you're stacking more with your hunger tokens and you're covering all your good stuff that way.
The only problem is then we're really just balanced around Obi-Wan, right? And that's
the other thing that I think is a big missing piece for Republic actually is Plo Koon.
I think Plo is going to be super.
Part of what I think, I have a theory, and this is completely unsubstantiated, other than this is just me looking at how the game was released.
Yeah.
It's really weird that we have this, like, everything that we have upcoming that's released, except for the Plo Koon box, is like Galactic Civil War stuff.
Yeah, or
moving forward.
Yeah.
And that box is just out of sync for some reason.
Yeah.
I think that probably what happened there is they designed Galactic Republic kind of as a unit within the context of that Plo Koon box.
With Plo Koon.
With him available as a resource.
Yeah.
And they were sort of like, oh, we want to do a pre-order bonus.
Yeah.
What if we do Padawan Ahsoka, because she's a really iconic character from this era, the Clone Wars TV show.
Yep.
But in order for that to feel like value, we need to push her box back.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
And so, I think it's very possible that, because Plo Koon is giving extra durability to clones and Padawan specifically,
Yeah.
which has been a big problem for them.
100%.
Right? And he also, in his box, has those melee focus clones. Like, who knows? It could be that everything in that box is just bad, and
we can see at least with Plo that Plo is going to be a solid figure,
yes.
right? And so the question is going to be Wolfpack. What does their tree look like? What is his name? Is it literally?
I think it's Commander Wolf, and that's why
so funny.
the
Wolfpack. I mean, it's going to be really funny to just see how that works.
Yeah.
Out,
so there's a lot that we don't know about that, but I have a bit of a theory that he's a missing piece that the Republic really needs in order to hum.
Yeah.
But I think that they could very reasonably tweak a couple of numbers up on Commandos, 212, especially 501st, and Cody, so that those are units that you actually maybe want to play sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you play Commandos frequently are your go-to choice for cost clone.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's just more of a lack of options rather than a choice. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's very plausible that with the addition of Plo Koon and no other changes, other than bringing Django and Magnus down a peg, things are fine.
I think that we actually see. I mean, I don't know, but I bet Django Magnus nerf comes sooner than we think.
You think so?
I don't think it's a year from now. I think I could see it coming in 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
That like by next summer, right? Because we'll have had a more of the Galactic Republic releases. I mean, that's June and August. That's the summer of next month, and I could see AMG thinking about making some kind of a change. I think that was kind of the idea, that there was a nerf within like a year of MCP.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it was 2 years in when
was
that
it really?
nerf came in.
Ooh.
And MCP was a little bit different in a lot of ways because it came out in late 2019.
Oh, that's
and
right.
So
with COVID.
organized play was a lot more.
They didn't have organized play.
There was a big tabletop simulator.
That was it.
That kept the game alive.
Yeah.
But that impacted a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
And I think that so the other thing is I think there's also a lot of potential that stuff in the next wave is going to impact the metagame dramatically.
Yeah.
Particularly because we're looking at adding new factions, new everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I am not a game designer. I have never worked professionally as a game designer.
Yeah.
I have played a lot of games.
Yeah.
But if I were in AMG shoes and I was even sitting where I am now, where I'm like, it looks like these guys probably get a nerf.
Yeah.
I would put that on the short list.
Yeah.
But I would want to, at the very least, wait until the next wave comes out and has an impact.
Yeah.
Which I think we're looking at releases for those in January.
Yeah.
So I would be shocked if they do anything to pull the trigger before next summer.
Yeah.
And I would not at all be surprised if it is quite a bit later than that.
Yeah.
Because it's very possible that because what you don't want to do is make a permanent change.
Yeah.
And then have those units be too weak.
Yeah,
in the future.
I mean, I think that with Django Magnus, I just don't see that happening. But
I agree.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we see. I think the real problem for us is that AMG doesn't really have any kind of feedback loop, right? Like we don't have official Shatterpoint tournaments, right? It's just community feedback.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think that the official tournaments are less valuable than tournament tryhards would like to say that they are.
I mean, but it's at least some kind of data, right? As opposed to just, I don't know. I guess we'll see. But hope springs eternal.
Yeah. And this is something we've talked about a lot with Marvel Snap too. Sometimes the perception of a buff or the perception of a nerf is enough to encourage people to play things less or play things more and experiment and solve for stuff. And so sometimes all you need to do is change numbers in a way that is not actually meaningful, but that feels more meaningful than it is.
Yeah.
So that people will take a good look at those things again and figure out, oh, actually, there are some things that work well here.
Yeah, 100%.
Keep playing Shatterpoint. Have some great holidays.
We love you all. Hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Bye.